Right now, though, we're going to be moving on to our third presenter this morning, and we're going to be having a presentation on Security Operations Center and ICS. And I'm delighted to welcome to the stage industrial cybersecurity professional from Honeywell Europe, Mr. Sinclair Koelemij.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm proactive today, so I'll put water on the table. Yeah, let me look at that. I'm talking about security operating centers. There are not that many ready yet at the moment for process control environment, but there are some. So my story is a little bit about the experience we had with those ICS systems that developed over years, security operations centers. The title is about its challenges. So I like to have a kind of disclaimer that whatever I say, I am positive about security operations centers, though I am going to address mostly negative points. But that is just to warn people about it. Well, I can skip this one very quickly. I'm OT. If there is someone OT, it's me. I've worked 20 years in plants, do all kind of stuff, and then I stepped over to the IT technology, cybersecurity networks. So I had to point to Christy to get this slide moving. Topics, well, why, who, what's needed, skills and tasks. That's basically what I'm going to talk about. Why you need a SOC? Well, basically these are a couple of reasons you could look at, but the most important reason I should have focused on maybe only one or two. Most people choose a SOC for staff reasons. Skills of people missing, response missing if something happens, and they're looking for solutions. We have been installing in the last 5 years more and more complex cybersecurity solutions. If you go back 5 years, 10 years ago, most systems had an antivirus system, they had a firewall, and that was about it. Today, we have IPS, we have SIEM, we have all kinds of monitoring systems in there, and it makes it more complex to configure it correctly, more complex to respond, more complex to interpret. So you need cybersecurity skills, and where most plants, in at least the smaller plants, were more or less led on a technical level by the system administrator, doing almost everything in the system. And he suddenly also got all these security tasks added to his job. Well, most of these tools are very specialist. You need to have a lot of knowledge of them to properly configure them. So it's getting more and more difficult for that job. And secondly, it is also a question if the system admin should be also your security manager in your system to combine those tasks. So that's basically a reason why most of the security operations centers we were involved in kind of existed. It had to do with the staff, with the skills, with the response speed, with that type of problem. I'll come to that later. Who would need a SOC? Well, people that have these problems with skills. But not everyone, because sometimes you're just too small to be a SOC, to have a SOC. If you have a small chemical plant and you have one system admin doing the job, well, it's very hard to justify a second guy to manage your security. And you can, of course, join up with a group of companies doing it. Some issues there, some examples also of companies having done that. Most companies that use security operations centers are larger, are SCADA systems with a lot of substations to manage, are clusters of systems on a bigger site where they want to centrally manage systems. But that's basically what drives those customers. And of course, the skills, the knowledge, the response speed. But there are a lot of issues also with that, and I come to that a little later. Okay, this slide probably takes a little bit more time than the previous ones. Like I said, if you go back to, I don't know, maybe 2010, 2012, that period, most of the systems only had antivirus, and they had a firewall. If you're lucky, because I've also seen plants that connected directly to the corporate network. I've seen pulp and paper plants doing that. I've seen food industry plants doing that. But okay, the oil and gas industry didn't do that. I think if I would walk into a Shell refinery 7 years ago, it would have a firewall. If I would walk in that refinery 15 years ago, it would have a firewall. It's that type of thing was always there, independent of what kind of stories you sometimes read on the internet. The larger oil and gas industry, the larger DCS systems, SCADA systems, always had at least a firewall, generally had antivirus, sometimes only installed, never updated after, but okay, that is the security state of that moment. Then people start investing in cybersecurity, specifically the last 5 years. They were putting in IPS, they were putting in whitelisting, they were putting in SIEM, all that type of equipment. Well, there are some issues with the equipment. Some security functions you can install very quickly because they don't, well, when you have installed them, you're basically ready. If you know what you do with whitelisting and you install it, okay, it works and not a problem. But it's something different if you would have a SIEM. If you install a SIEM, well, I can make it operational in a couple of weeks. But to really make it work, that takes a much longer period and a much longer, I've seen yesterday a slide which says 2 years. Well, process control might be a little bit different, depend a little bit on your ambition, but it's a long, long time. It's certainly more than a year to get everything good running. I mean, event consolidation is one, collecting all the events, that's kind of a technical job, but to have good correlation rules, to have good intelligence in there, that is a very long and tedious job. I'll come to that in a later slide also. If you look at all these systems, SIEM, antivirus, AV, intrusion prevention systems, firewalls, today more or less most of the time next generation firewalls that a lot more filter capabilities than the old ones. Whitelisting, security monitoring, breach detection. There's even one missing. We have recently had a customer that liked data loss prevention in its system. I'd never seen much justification for that, but okay, it's something you can install. Risk monitoring is something new. It's kind of monitoring over your security functions and if they are all working properly. All these equipment require specific configuration, specific maintenance, updating. So you need someone to do that for you. Became a dedicated task security, certainly in a larger environment. And then it makes sense to have a security operations center, maybe bundling things on the distance from the plant itself. But generally not remote. I'll come to that also later. So what is the task of Security Operations Center? Well, in my experience, the number one task is to respond to security incidents, to events, and to cure them or to fix them. But sometimes it's also necessary for the workload to justify that they are going to do other jobs, like maintaining the system, making sure that the fact signs of your IPSs are up to date, making sure signatures are up to date, making sure the patches are up to date. And there immediately we get an issue, because people from the Security Operations Center are not always capable of updating these systems. They're not capable of installing a patch in a running plant. That might look silly, but still, people get very nervous if you start patching control systems, because you have to reboot nodes, you have to, well, there's a certain moment of risk. And so generally, system admins also still have a role in that process. Security administration, of course, making new accounts, but that's also not something on a daily basis. Sometimes it's done when you have a contractor, you need to add a new user. Well, then data activity can be done, and we have seen customers where we have installed authentication management systems that kind of control that whole process, where in the traditional way, people just walk to the domain controller and configured a new account without any procedures and any processes around it. So that is typically the activities I've seen executed in the security operations centers of a couple of companies, mainly in Europe. I've also been in one here in the Gulf region, but that was relatively similar to that. I'm coming to measuring organizations. We have something called security profiling service, where we kind of measure the performance of how well is your design, how well is your operations, and to be able to compare plans. And before I show you the slide, where I like to show where the weaknesses are in today's plans, so you can see how challenging it can be to implement a security operations center. But this is kind of a model we developed about 5 years ago. Is on one end, on the vertical end, you have the design effectiveness, so how strong is your security from a functional perspective, and on the horizontal bar, you have the operations effectiveness, how mature are your processes. Well, basically we use on the vertical line, we use the IEC 62443 specification. On the horizontal line, we use the C2M2 specification. And then we have questionnaires and analysis and scoring techniques. And basically, if you look at it in reality, then security operations centers only make sense when you have a relatively high maturity level, because you need to have things documented, you need to be able to adjust yourself to a changing environment, and that would be in C2M2 terminology, the maturity indicator level 2 and level 3. And you also need to have a certain threat to invest into security operations centers. So generally companies doing that, they try to achieve security level 3. Some want security level 4, but most ICS systems today, most ICS SCADA systems today, do not have all the capabilities to implement security level 4. So this is more a theoretical thing. I mean, in our installed base and the various sites I've visited, generally the highest level reaches security level 3 and not higher than that. And even there are sometimes gaps. That's basically this slide. So the security operations center I've seen are either security level 3 with MIL 2 and some MIL 4. And that is really an achievement, because that's a lot of organization, a lot of documentation to be able to reach that level. Well, to translate it towards actual scoring, looking at people, technology, and the processes, we use kind of cybersecurity framework. We added on the left an extra criterion called anticipate, where we, for building a SIEM, for example, for building good correlation rules in a SIEM that makes sense for a process control environment, you do need to do some threat modeling. You do need to do some build some attack trees. You need to develop that, to know the scenarios and the indicators where you want to check and how you want to check that. So that's why that extra column is in there. The right side is what we call the Cybersecurity Framework, which was developed in the US, and it basically the same thing, identify the risk, protect, detect, respond, and recover. If you look at the scores, this is about, at present, we started measuring this a couple of years ago. It's about 48 plants at that point in time. I cannot say this is all oil and gas industry, because it's a mixture between oil and gas and chemical. So that is not the type of knowledge we have. On the right side is the 0%, on the left side is the 100%. So if you score on certain requirements only 40%, well, then you end up in the orange-yellow area. If you score closer to 100%, you end up in the green area. Well, you see, if I look at one of the more important ones for this Security Operations Center discussion, you see on protection, specifically on the technology, and that might also be a little bit biased because in these companies, they actually ask for security support, so they already have added security, they already are aware, and not every company might have the same awareness. But you see, on the security functions, they're doing okay. They're scored in the green area. They have lots of stuff installed. If you look at the people, well, they're training people. More and more people have become security knowledgeable. If you look at the processes, they're behind. They don't like to document processes. They're very often security. If you look at the process level, most plants score maturity indicator level 1. So they do ad hoc processes. They have some documents, some process. Everyone has a backup process. But not everyone has an incident response process. Not everyone knows how to, for example, disaster recovery is a very strange thing, but many plants do not have a proper disaster recovery process and system. So protection, okay, detection on the right side, you see almost everything red. Very few plants implemented detection. If you look at the better sites, they implemented things like SIEM, like security monitoring, like IPS, but there are lots of, the majority, if you come into a plant, don't have that. So they're still working on that. And if they have it, if they have SIEMs and IPS, they're still in the initial phases of learning on what are the best rules and the best filter settings for these systems. You look at response, well, that is another curious thing. You know, many people have antivirus, for example, but the moment they have a virus, they panic. They don't know what to do. They don't know what to respond and how to respond. They've never thought about it. They've not prepared it. That's a very strange combination, but okay, that response process is often missing. And if you're missing it at the antivirus level, well, if you start talking about IDS or IPS or SIEM, it becomes more and more complicated because there are different things to look at that point in time. Recover, I'll not talk about that much, but I just mentioned it later on. Recovery processes are also, can also be very complex. Let me point again to Christy. Well, what does a Security Operations Center need? Well, at least to be good in the detection and response part. And if you look at the scores in that area, they're not good. Plants need to improve. The maturity indicator level scores on processes just show they're not good. And it is not that easy to fix. You can make a document, and maybe in 2 weeks, you have a nice incident response document, perfectly. But that doesn't mean that your organization has a nice incident response process. That takes a lot more time to get people aligned to these type of processes and to get people performing properly. And you can do a technology solution is the most simplest thing you can do. You buy the stuff, you install the stuff, and it operates. But to implement a policy, a process, procedure, to have people work according to that, that is one of the most difficult and time-consuming areas of all. So, yeah, are we capable, or is every plant capable of starting a security operations center? Well, I have a big question mark there, because even very mature plants in technology side may lack things on operational procedural side. Let's go zoom in a little bit on a SOC to address some other issues. A proper SOC is not one guy, it's multiple people. A proper SOC is multiple levels of people. And you need, on one end, what we call the level 1 side, we need continuity. It's not like that you have a security incident and the next security incident, you have to say, oh, stop, I'm already working on one. So you need a process where you split out the first line from the second line where you can take more time. That's that security level, SOC level 1 and SOC level 2. In some cases, it even might require forensics. Well, to find a good forensics analyst, that is a very difficult thing, because that is one of the most knowledgeable persons on security, and they're not that much around. So many SOCs I've seen do not have that third level. They either have the third level in the government. They might escalate things to police organizations, military organizations to fill in that gap. But okay, these organizations are good in the IT side, in the Microsoft Intel side, the Cisco side, the network side, but they're not too good in the process control side either. And the process control functions are not that well covered. So SOCs also give you a staffing problem that you need multiple people, multiple levels to do that. Another thing is you need to respond. Well, who can respond? Is it really so that someone has a limited view on the plant in his daily operations can respond to something happening in the control system environment, where you still, most of the time, want to keep the system alive? You do not want to shut down the system. You like to solve the problems while on production. So response can be an issue. Recovery is an issue. Recovery strategy. If you look in recovery from an IT perspective, you recover a node, you recover a server, a station. If you recover in a process control environment, you do not recover a node or a station from a cybersecurity attack, because cybersecurity attack probably attacks all systems, because many systems are connected. You would recover a boiler, maybe, but the boiler has a DCS system, has a safety system, might have a burner management system. So there are multiple systems. We don't talk there about recovery point objectives, but much more about maximum tolerable downtime, because you have to recover these 3 systems in a particular sequence. If you look at plant-wide, it's even more complex to do that. So recovery strategies and recovery activities are generally still the automation function in the process environment. I've got 1 minute, 23 seconds for the staff and the knowledge. Story about this is when you want to implement, for example, a SIEM, which is a very key instrument in the Security Operations Center, that's very complex because you need these correlations. Well, if you buy a SIEM, you get a number of correlations from the company that provides you the SIEM, but 95% you can throw out the door because they're not relevant for process control environment. If you want to step up and make your correlations also looking at process events, like changes in your process, well, it even becomes more complex to do that. And most companies are not ready because they did not make proper inventories of their, build up their scenarios. Well, this you can't read, probably. Well, I can read it a little bit, but back rows couldn't read it. But basically, process control system has 3 layers. There is this IT layer, Microsoft, and the normal thing, the DCS functions. Then you have the functions itself. What are the functions of the DCS system? Because these systems you misuse. Now I'm 0 second. And the last one is the process equipment. If I want to attack a furnace, I need to know, what do I want to attack the furnace? What is the weakness of a furnace? I would like to raise the temperature or something like that. Okay, if there are any questions, I can go later on. Will finish my slide. This is kind of the knowledge you should have. And I think you can download the slides. So I probably either talk too long or put a slide too much in there. One of the two. But I thank you very much.